All right, I'm gonna do changes to parent functions. So these ones I actually I want you to turn these guys into me when you come to class. Okay, so these are the ones that you're gonna turn in. So changes to the parent functions. The main one that I'm gonna use for an example is the quadratic. Quadratic function we think of in this format. We think of a, b, x minus c squared plus d. I know that you guys did this differently in the past, but we want it to be the exact same when we move on to the trigonometry stuff. So it makes more sense to kind of convert it right now. Before you guys did h and k right here, and this was still a, but this was 1 over b. I don't want to do any of that stuff, okay? I want to do it like this, so it's just a, b, c, d, and I'm moving across, all right? So what a is going to do is if a is absolute value of a is greater than 1, it's a vertically stretched by a factor of the absolute value of a. If the absolute value of a is less than 1, it's vertically compressed by a factor of absolute value of a. If a is negative, then it's reflected across the y-axis. Wait, let me think about that. The x-axis. Reflected across the x-axis. Apologies. So it can be two of these things at the same time. Because these are only dealing with absolute value, the negative portion only deals with reflecting across the x-axis. The b part, if the absolute value of b is greater than 1, it's going to be horizontally compressed by a factor of the absolute value of b. If the absolute value of b is less than 1, it's going to be horizontally stretched by a factor of absolute value of b. And this is how I want you to write it, okay? Except for you put a number right here. And if b is negative, then it's reflected across the y-axis. So notice right here it says minus c. I'm gonna actually change that. I'm gonna make this just like this, so it's a little bit more simple for us. Okay, so if c is negative, well, let's say c is positive first. C is positive, we move to the left c spots. If c is negative, we move to the right c spots. If d is positive, we move up d spots. And if d is negative, we move down d spots. And we're going to use this for all of them. And so I'm going to show you a couple other examples that we use the exact same rules for, okay? And that's for any function really, but like let's say I had a square root, so it's going to be a square root of b x plus c plus d. So all of these pieces do the same thing. It's just a different kind of function. So let me show you a couple. So f of x equals 1/2 x plus 2 squared minus 9. So 1/2, that's a. A, absolute value of a is less than 1. It's vertically compressed by a factor of the absolute value of a. So vertically compressed by a factor of 1/2. There's no b value. Well, b equals 1, but there's nothing that says b equals 1. We just ignore it when that happens. If a or b is 1, we ignore it. If c or d is 0, we ignore it. So we ignore it. Now c says 2, so if c is positive, it goes to the left 2. And d is negative 9, and d is negative, we go down d, which is 9. But notice that all the numbers I write are positive here. The only thing that a negative value makes me write is reflected across the y-axis or reflected across the x-axis. Do another example with a whole bunch of stuff, okay? So I'm going to go for square root of negative 1/3 x plus 2 plus 1. 4. That's A. Absolute value of A greater than 1. That's going to be vertically stretched by a factor of 4. B is negative 1/3. B, absolute value of B is less than 1. 1/3 is less than 1. It's going to be horizontally stretched by a factor of 1/3. Now usually we would actually write this as the inverse of it because we're not going to stretch by 1/3. So usually we would say horizontally stretched by a factor of, the inverse is 3/1 or 3. Either way is fine with me. Negative, it says B is negative, it's reflected across the y-axis. C is positive, we move to the left, C values. D is positive, we move up D values. So that's it. I mean, that's what we're doing on these guys. It doesn't matter how it looks. We're following these rules. And you guys had these rules before. You just use different letters to represent them. So hopefully doing it this way doesn't confuse you. If it does, you're welcome to keep using the old rules that you had. You just might have to deal with me referring to them as this way, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Remember that I want those problems from the beginning of the video.